Hello everyone, I am Luke, the Game Master for the Promethean Directive, and today I'll be going over a history of our very first season, which ran for about 3 months over the course of this past summer, and involved around 75 participants in around 25 countries and some non-governmental organizations. I'll be showing off all of the maps without Fog of War, which no one was privy to during the course of the game, and I'll also be just discussing the events that have happened and covering like alliances and other stuff that may not appear on the map as much as I can remember it. So starting off, here's a really nice map that Kevin made. He was one of the participants, and he, over the course of the directive, provided some maps with labels, like this one, which includes nation names and logos. Here you can see all of our nations. I believe there's 26 to start off with. All spread around. You see they've got limited territory, and then all of the near black color means that that's unoccupied land. You can see mountains, rivers, and resources. There's a little key up at the top showing all the resources. They weren't fully updated, like I didn't upgrade these as time went on, but they are still accurate for the symbols. And those strategic resources were needed for people to build with advanced technologies and things like that. Here you can see the alliances. These were the 5 alliances that kind of dominated politics at the beginning of the game. 4 of them, POK, DTO, AOTS, and Aegis, all formed before the game started, with Central Powers forming on turn 2. The Unfortunately, the thing about the beginning of the game is that there were not any major power conflicts. Like, you'd think, oh, this is ripe for, like, a World War I-esque conflict. Nope, everyone wanted peace. It just didn't happen. But eventually it will, and we'll talk about that later. And then here are the biomes. Durford is mostly desert with badlands. Over here we've got Sawales, which is savanna and plains. Tundra and taiga up in Morai. More temperate and jungle over in Mirdum and Valtoria. And then planar is plains. These were like mountainous, kind of like frosty plains. Younger forests and sparse plains over here, and then the deposit is like a weird like lava zone. So starting off with the turn 0 map, you can see again, basically everything's the same. There's nothing interesting here, but it will get chaotic the second I click the right arrow and start to reveal the movements of fleets. There's not too many yet. It'll get way, way worse. Here we can see basic deployments. This is the Eternal Steamworks of Victoria, who was one of the NGOs who were moving from their starting point on Wales over to Valtoria. You can see other like scouting missions. Oh yeah, the big thing you'll see over a lot of the early ones is the Light of the Sanctified sent a lot of drones all over the place. They sent one to the deposit, they sent one to scout out these fellas, and kind of made themselves a few early enemies by doing that, but they got some useful intel. You'll also note Task Force Cobalt from the Brotherhood of Sleet and Steel heading straight center for the deposit. So I hinted early on that the deposit had very valuable things in it, and that whoever controlled the center island would do very well for themselves. And in fact, the Brotherhood asked for a technology that they wanted, a special thing, and I was like, you know what? You could spend a lot on this, or I challenge you, if you can take and hold the center island of the deposit for, I think it was 3 turns, then you'll get this technology for free. And he was like, bet, and immediately sent it in there. Now, few people knew about this, either because they weren't paying attention, or because the public map had his fleet barely moving. It just so happened that way, but I also checked to make sure that didn't immediately out him. But the public map hid that movement, so he at least had time to figure it out. And that'll be a very fun and interesting play that gets talked about later on. There's some other movements, like people moving to secure resources, or just claiming land for Dow right there. And then same for those guys. Moving over to the next one. If I swap back and forth, you can see all the land that got claimed. Hopefully that wasn't too seizure-inducing. But you can see these 2 nations. Silver Silver Drive and the Sephir Coalition, or Silver Drive and Sephir Empire, I believe, decide on a common border where they kind of split the resource along here and made an ugly piece of border gore, which I hate them for. Anyways, these guys expanded, as did them, and probably a couple others. It's kind of hard to track all the movement. Here you can see these guys. Oh, yeah, I skipped forward, didn't I? Yeah. These fellows also started scouting out just to expand around their island. They were people that chose to build dense, or build tall rather than wide, so they hardly ever moved beyond their island. Meanwhile, other people expanded. Moving on to... So this is the turn where all 5 of those alliances had already been established by. And this is also, I believe, where the Sons of Sewale show up. Were they? Yeah, they were not there before. So the Sons of Sewales were a kind of terrorist group that began provoking conflict in the region between Historia and Ruscommando. So they were being run by someone who volunteered them as an idea and eventually got promoted to an event help. That was Komomo. Had the idea for their nation or for their company to make a profit by helping to provoke a war between these two. And the goal was to use the Sons of Sewales to do that. So they attacked both sides and tried to convince each of them that the other one had done it. Ultimately, this extra antagonism wasn't really needed, but it did ultimately help provoke the conflict. But I thought it was such a great idea that I made Komomo an event help, and they no longer had to provide funds from their in-game corporation to fund them. I made them globally funded, whatever you want to call it. It was a game master's choice at that point. And they're going to continue being a presence on the continent for a long time. Moving on... You can see a bunch more movement this turn. People moving all around there. We've got these fellas, the Remnant Federation, checking out the deposit, as well as Dow sending a drone to go investigate the nickel. I think they wanted to claim it, but I told them you can't just claim that far away with a single tiny craft. Other movement, just people looking around, trying out the movement. And then here... we also see the beginnings of a war between Historia and Ruscommando. It had been fermenting for a while, with a bunch of insults slung between both sides, and some quality out-of-game antagonism to head it off. I probably should have done something to make sure that out-of-game fights didn't get brought in-game, but ultimately I wasn't prepared for that, so I didn't intervene earlier. But this fight got very bitter, and ultimately was probably not as good for the game as it could have been, but at least it provided some early conflict to get things going. You can see that they both crossed the border and sent forces against each other to seize land. You'll also see that a group here is building a city, which was contracted by the Steamworks to build a town for Ruscommando, which will be very important next turn. So if we get over to turn 4, we can see that a big battle here is happening at Vorpost Giebelstadt. And what goes down in the very first battle? Nuclear weapons. A lot of them. This is where the Sewales War would get its reputation for being a nuclear bloodbath, because Historia was not pulling any punches, and they made a lot of nuclear craft. So they had like blimps carrying nukes, they just had regular standalone nukes, all kinds of stuff. And you'll also see the Northern Border Patrol Squadron showed up from from the Caladrian Directive over here. As part of a foreign intervention in the war. I think they were one of the first ones. They were certainly the first one in this, but they would be involved with other battles too. And yeah, the whole continent spiraling into war, or at least half of it is. Meanwhile, everyone else is just doing their thing, expanding land, sending envoys back and forth, and of course, LTS is sending their scout drones everywhere. Although in this case, the Korex are doing some scouting of their own. both these people sent drones to this hole right here. So you'll notice if you look very carefully, there's 1, 2, and 3 holes on the map. What are they? They are actually giant holes. So the Promethean Directive is set on an Alderson disk called New Cancun, which is a flat, like disc-shaped world that's missing the middle. And in the middle, a sun is bobbing up and down. So this disk is like, I think outside 300 kilometers thick, and these holes go straight through it and would allow like spacecraft to travel between either side. Now, the setting that these people are involved in is not that advanced. So really they're living on a world that was not built for them, but which still exists, and they're just trying to figure out what it is. So multiple nations tried to scout these out, and I think New Horizons, or someone down here, did the same thing for theirs. But I provide a little bit of like plot and story to these as people explore them. Ultimately, there was like enough content related to that to last like twice as long as we actually went. So it's kind of unfortunate we didn't get to go there. Maybe I'll save it for a future season. But there were plans for people to explore those, get through them, start to trying to exploit the resources within. A little bit of that happened at the very, very end of the game, but not as much as I wanted. So ultimately, it was just a little bit of a back and forth between me and these nations of, can they manage to get a drone or something through the hole? And only a couple people succeeded to get something through, but no one was able to exploit that, or at least exploit the through hole. Meanwhile, we can see these fellas managed to scout out the deposit, check it out, and Task Force Cobalt officially put up foothold here a few turns ago. It wasn't just on 4. And because of that, they've therefore managed to get their tech, but they decided to stay because they are getting valuable archaeology on the island. Meanwhile, Vard, the player, has a nation up here, the Hungering Deep, who kind of didn't do anything. So that blue's just going to stay there for the rest of the game, pretty much. Anyways, anything else fun? Just people moving around. This is another one of our NGOs that was exploring around and discussing, doing some diplomacy. More NGOs will show up later, but we mainly just had those 2 at the start, I think. And Pinnacle. There we go. Pinnacle and... Brisbee's NGO. I think that's them. They may be showing up later, but there were 2 stationary NGOs and then 2 mobile ones. The Steamworks were mobile, and these guys here were mobile. So the NGOs had played a more minor role, but that didn't stop people like the Steamworks from getting involved in everything. I could try to draw a diplomacy map for the Steamworks. It would be impossible. It's just an absolute web of entangling obligations and a total mess. But it was really fun and interesting, especially for me to follow that as like a wallflower. But even for everyone else, it was playing a big game of diplomacy. Who is doing what? Who's doing what else? You'll also see, I think our first bounty showed up, and it will stay there for the next like 15 turns because no one wanted to do the bounties. Anyways, moving on to this turn, you can see again even more movement. This time, LTS was like, let's scout out everything. And managed to claim some more land down there too. Here we can see Corex gotten a little foothold over there, and these fellas, the Cordic Autonomous Empire, made a little island there, and I think all these nations are expanding too. Yeah, they're expanding there. Historia, actually, I think they're pretty stationary. Eventually, we'll see Tayo take off, but that hasn't started yet. So the war over here is ongoing, about as bad as earlier. More units flying each way. Steamworks continuing to sell to both sides, accumulating troops that are going to Historia over here on this island of Unrug, and troops for Rust Commando ending up everywhere else. That's kind of it for this turn. Eventually, we'll see more alliances showing up. On the third turn, the AI Overlord showed up. That was kind of an informal alliance between some of the AI or kind of like that kind of machine factions, including like Corex, Pinnacle, and so on. We also had the Crucible Anomaly Research and Defense organization show up on turn 4, which was an organization carried mainly between LTS and Historia, and later I think Taio, who were researching the holes and other anomalies to try and figure out what's going on with the world. And then on this, the turn before this one, turn 5, Dow, Corex, and Remnant formed some kind of scheming negotiation ring. I don't know exactly what all it was for, but try and coordinate and bring them together, which ultimately unified the Pact of Cavaltor over here between these three nations with those two to make them even more powerful. And pretty soon we're going to get the Deposit War. That's not here yet, but I know it's being, at this point, planned in-game. And of course, the war between Historia and Rescommando is getting absolutely chaotic. It would take me like 20 minutes to piece together just what the heck was happening, how many battles we need to run, who would be involved. Because you see, you've got like a conditional battle of Daiwizja Zensti has to fight Group of 6. If it survives, it fights JG7. If it survives, it runs into JG12 and JG10. If it survives that, it runs into Unit 684 and the 3rd Expeditionary. With Shiochimzi, whatever, also on a similar path, also doing similar stuff. And then maybe they run into... I'm going to do a better system for Season 2, but it was at least funny trying to piece together the absolute chaos. Because even more so, all of the factions that saw a map saw the same thing, but with circles and uncertainty. So they didn't know until I announced it who actually was fighting, because their uncertainty could have been large enough. Moving on, you see a lot of big cross-nation moves here. So we can see, oh, yeah, of course. It's all LTS drones. All of the ones with the red triangles are LTS drones. Absolute madness. And actually, hang on. Yeah, here you can see I swapped from dots to triangles in the code because it was just that chaotic to keep track of before. So the triangles indicate which way they're moving. And they're colored now, too. So yeah, more chaos happening over here. LTS sent a squadron to intervene in the war because, of course, they would. And then, meanwhile, the Sons of Suales are escalating, actually. They hit the home island of Caladria several turns ago, and now they've sent a bigger fleet over to attack Piotr, the capital of Historia, which was one of the biggest battles, and ended in, of course, knowing Historia and the Suns, more nukes. The Suns used a nuke that they had captured, which was a broken arrow lost from Historia in one of their earlier battles. They found that. It was brought in to the leader of the Sons of Suales, who was known as Father, by one of his sons, actually, who was very irradiated and not doing great. But he brought the nuke to his father, and they embarked on their way to go and try and nuke Piotr. Had I been more unfriendly, I could have done a lot of damage to the city. As it was relatively minor because they detonated the nuke fairly far out to sea. But it's definitely not a good look for your nation to get a nuke set off outside your capital, especially when it's one of your own. Meanwhile, yeah, just more chaos over here. And here we go. There's the beginning of the Deposit War. So, actually, yeah, you'll notice this red ring. That was a jamming field put up by the Brotherhood to prevent wireless communication from being used inside of that ring. They paid a lot of good money to get it set up, and with an RTG power, I think it was. So they paid good money for it, and ultimately got their value for it, because then anything that enters that circle can't be given orders while it's in there. They have to be given pre-queued orders, which kind of helped to limit the effectiveness of the fights that ensued. So, Corex, Remnant, and Dow decided that they wanted to take foothold for themselves, because what happened was Brotherhood of Sleet and Steel announced that they were going to be staying in the deposit for something like 6 turns to get the technology they needed. But in reality, they only needed 4. So when these guys invade on turn 5, they're like, oh yeah, we were so smart, we blocked them. But BSS, Brotherhood of Sleet and Steel, did the most big-brained move that I gotta give so much credit to Tarnish Heart for. He managed to totally bamboozle all of them, and he managed to escape with the technology, which honestly he didn't even end up using much. It was a civilian technology to make it so that he could do coal liquefaction, to get coal to give like oil or natural gas instead of coal. Just give his vehicles more power. Anyway, the fear of what that technology might be was that a super weapon was something even more powerful, caused these 3 nations to declare war on the Brotherhood of Sleet and Steel, who at this point I think had joined up with the Triumvirate and the Light of the Sanctified to form an alliance. And very soon they would also invite Vard and the Hungering Deep in as well. So you can see the war is starting. Acrididine, I think, actually attacked Foothold, or may have been waiting, I'm not sure. Meanwhile, everyone else getting positioned to attack. Yeah. With a big Dao fleet showing up and forming the city of Diaboli Passiscore, which I think was Devil's Deal, is the translation there. They use like a bunch of Latin names for everything. Sacrum Lumen Sacred Light, Modus Aureum, I'm not sure what that one is. Stygialis Beneficia. So, yeah, Chaos is going. I think they changed color. I think I made them a more greenish yellow, so they're less vibrant. Anyway, yeah, more stuff. People are expanding their territory and just building up resources. And so on. Here you can see that we've got a big expansion coming in from the Imperial Taio Navy, who once, I think this is when I made it so that way land generates income, or maybe it was shortly after this, but they claimed the through hole and then some more resources, well, just general land. What else? These two decide on mutual border to have, and that's probably it for this one. Oh yeah, here we go. The big battle, the Battle of Foothold, took place here, with the ultimate result that Task Force Cobalt was destroyed and Foothold was captured by these people. But Brotherhood was able to get out with all the very valuable stuff, but would like kind of vow to return and recapture their foothold. Moving on to the next turn. Again, more battles happening over here. Pretty much every single turn there's more battles. Here is a fun thing where in a desire to end or put an end to Historia's aggression in the war and their use of nuclear weapons, these people, the Serpians and the Moonfolks, planned to backstab, or not really backstab, they weren't really allied, but to attack Historia. And so they moved a fleet over here, said they were going to do some like ocean analysis expeditions in the south or something, which Historia didn't fight, but they went over there and were planning to do that, but you'll see then on the next turn that they did nothing and then just went straight back. But there was a potential for the war to involve even more people, but as it was, it's mostly just a single LTS force. The Caladrian one flew back home, and then just so much fighting between these two. In fact, actually, LTS was mainly here to fight Suails. They weren't there to get involved in most of the conflict, even though they were allied with Historia. They knew that they used higher tech and better built vehicles and didn't want to be dogpiling Russ Commando, whose vehicles were less well designed and were using like World War II technology as opposed to like Cold War or near future. What else? Yeah, more land expansion from Taio. There's so much to happen. I really should have filmed this video earlier, but it's just when I got around to it, or when I would have remembered more. Yeah, you can see Central Powers are like sharing ports and facilities and stuff like that, so they can move between each other. Yeah, so this is, I think, around this turn, or probably a few turns ago, actually, was when I did the Great Durford famine. So it's funny because the continent with the most nations and the most people is also the one that is a completely or a barely inhabitable desert. Like it was meant to be an Africa kind of nation that's like really low on development because it's mostly desert, very poor water and food supplies, things like that, bad soil. But everyone decided they liked that continent. So I was like, you know what? I'll just put in a fun event because there's not any conflicts going on where most of the nations, anyways, the ones that canonically have a high population, so not coin, and the ones that are mainly in areas with like no, like there's a couple little rivers here, but the ones that are likely not to have any good farmland got hit with a famine where they needed to buy food from other nations, which I said had this amount of surplus, so they were fighting over that. Well, they were meant to fight over it and maybe have a war. That did not happen. People just bought it because I didn't make it too scarce, and I let a few too many people come up with innovative solutions to get extra food. But expect more events kind of like that in season 2, but I'll try to craft them a little bit better to actually have more value. There was still some fun that came out of it, like people trying to like scalping food that didn't need it for trying to buy food from other people so they could sell it at a premium later. All kinds of fun stuff. So yeah, it was an interesting little part of the game. Yeah, meanwhile, even more LTS scouts. So many LTS scouts. Yeah, you can see now that Foothold has been captured, and these fellas are hanging out around here. What actually happened, so I think Strider Division consisted of 4 ships, or maybe 5, and several of them got sunk going in the passageway because Brotherhood of Sleet and Steel thought ahead and mined it. I think they mined all but one of the entrances, and those mines would sink 2 of these ships, I think, or heavily damage them, and come in later. Now, yeah, with this war happening, and LTS and Triumvirate getting involved, you can see that LTS actually attacked several places. James got absolutely obliterated by a massive laser in the middle of Phoenix, which is the largest city in the world at this point. Some of these down here, mostly I think managed to capture and occupy a large amount of Corex land, because these small little LTS fleets were mostly their very nimble and agile aircraft, which whose name I'm spacing right now. But anyways, they were able to destroy a lot of the defenses without taking any casualties, and they also captured Solera Seaport. Anything else to note? Yeah, just some movements around here for that planned strategy. Somewhere along the line there'll be pirates over here. I may miss those though. And yeah, Victoria's slowly making their way across Dareford over in this direction. Over here now we can see another bounty showed up a couple turns ago, which got attacked by Silver Drive, and their planes got absolutely obliterated because it was giant tanks that were too big to be damaged easily by the aircraft, and the aircraft were fairly easily shot down by packs mostly. But they did do some damage at least. Oh, who did that big move? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, Historia, I think, is claiming these islands. I'm not sure why that guy was doing all the way over there. But, yeah, there's a bunch of massive fleet moves. I'll try to minimize the amount that can happen in next season, just because they kind of look weird on the map, and they don't provide all that much. Here you can see the snakes are Rattlesnake Pack's preparing to claim some more land up there. We can see... Yeah, I think they're about to claim more land too. Meanwhile, even more fighting's happening over here in this main war, but it's kind of at a slower pace now. There's less big battles. A lot of the forces have been destroyed, but there's still occupation going on. Yeah, those two are just chilling. Anything else? Oh yeah, so here is where Brisby, the person running this NGO, sent a salvage fleet, or I believe sent a salvage fleet, to start making their way to the deposit to start picking up salvage that they have purchased the rights to from the various involved parties. So much random fun stuff happened like that. Yeah, here you can also see that the LTS force attack Slayer retreated, but they left naval mines behind in the Slayer seaport, which damaged Task Force 1, though they were able to recapture it. And then, meanwhile, oh, here we go, more nuclear weapons. So, I'm pretty sure Lancer 3 is a nuclear weapon fleet. Same with Lancer, Lancer 2 and Lancer 1 were nuclear weapon forces that just got erroneously indicated to ships, which attacked the Triumvirate and LTS. Yes, although they all got caught up here on the island of, I think, Postal. Was that what that island's called? But there was a big battle there involving Valiant's 1st Assault Corps, where the Remnant Federation managed to occupy this island for a little bit. It'll last a fairly long occupation. Meanwhile, Task Force Arctic, joined by 1st John and probably soon Triumvirate Defense Force, are planning to try and retake foothold. And Vard is maybe doing something up here. That's probably it for now. These guys are just cooperating on just moving fleets around. Yeah, funnily enough, these Durford is the only place where you can see fleets moving and know that they're not going to attack each other, because they were so peaceful and never really did anything against each other until later when they did. Anyways, another bounty shows up. The combat bounty moves. I think those two should have been wiped out there. Or, actually, here's what happened. Those didn't fight it yet because their position was accidentally leaked beforehand and they shouldn't have known where it was at. So they would have had an unfair advantage to attacking it first. Anyway, yeah, more fighting over here. Where I believe a demilitarized zone got set up. Finally, they figured out a treaty on turn 11. They've been fighting for like 8 turns now. And each turn is equivalent to half a year. I believe I made it. So they've been fighting for 4 years, including like probably about 100 nuclear weapons at this point. And they negotiate a peace, which Victoria volunteers to enforce. Really funny how the warmongers who tried to start the war wound up being part of the demilitarized zone enforcement. And several turns ago I missed this. The Balkans alliance kind of got formed, which was between Drifting Moon, Rattlesnake Pact, and the Pact of Cavaltor. It wasn't like a formal alliance, I don't think, at least yet, but it was like discussions about that. And what else? Yep, salvage fleet still going. Here you can see that I've drawn on some occupation lines. So LTS is occupying this area, Triumvirate occupying that, LTS occupying these places. I should do a more thorough job of that in next season. And yeah, I think that's mostly it. Some more land getting expanded over here, right? Yeah, Coin and New Horizons get a shared border finally. And, oh yeah, but these borders meet up as well. What else? So much stuff happened. I had so much trouble keeping track of it, and I was reading messages, looking at maps, looking at spreadsheets for like 5 hours a day at the peak of the game, so it was a lot of fun, though. Moving on, not much land changes. This one expands. Oh, never mind, I say that. Yeah, all of these guys expand their land. And more stuff happens that's marked as occupied. And then this big battle happens here. So Vard finally gets involved, sends a fleet, and a big fight happens here, with the ultimate result being a big win for the Pact of Cavaltor and their allies. That was a really scuffed battle. I probably should have split it up into multiple, and there were some misentered orders and orders that weren't entered at all and stuff like that. So it was a total mess. This is a corrected version of the map that had the orders modified as best I could to make them legal without making a total mess of it. So people that were like crossing over the land or coordinates were entered incorrectly, stuff like that. I don't want to correct that in the future if I can help it, but for this season I kind of had to, just to get that to make sense. Meanwhile, LTS attacked and I think defeated the better part of Task Force 1, recaptured Solera and occupied this land here. And then sent a force to attack Vidite Abisi, which I think the attacking force was destroyed. Here you can see, I think this is where where Durford is maybe getting ready to attack Dow. So they had been scared, terrified of Dow and their allies for the entire game, because Dow is composed of some very good builders who make some very competitive designs, and I intentionally let Dow be on Durford, so that way they could serve as like a antagonist to the low meta nations who greatly outnumbered Dow. Like there's 5 of them against 1 nation. I thought for sure that they'd be able to pull off a combat there without getting too stressed out, but that was not the case. And more stuff was done later to try and make that situation better. But ultimately, I really wanted to see a war between the Durford Treaty Organization and the Divini Arcana Ordinum, which would have been really interesting. It would have been a battle of massed armies against much more powerful individual craft, and they could have almost certainly pulled it off because almost all of Dow's focus is up here. That's where they've got their big fleets, they've got a super weapon brewing, all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, my hope was that that could have happened, but it just didn't. Meanwhile, the peace treaty is being upheld, but I think there's still stuff going on with the Sons of Sewales. What else? Yeah. Their financial center gets built up for that NGO. Trying to see what else could be going on here. You see the start of a really cool pattern around Caladria. They got like 3 fleets of like radar-equipped planes that were just like flying a constant circle of their islands, which looks really cool on the master map. It looked really weird on the individual ones, but yeah, here we see the intact pattern. So what's happened on this one? We get the emergence of a new NGO. This is SR. And I believe another one emerges down here. Or that might be in a couple turns, though. A couple turns, I think, then. Meanwhile, Historia is claiming a random little island over there. And this one, too. And then some distress calls showed up. Those were like quest missions where people could send a fleet to check on the distress call and see what was going on. I think 2 of them were pirates, but the rest just gave a small reward, I think, to those who went there. Yeah, another distress call down there and up there. There's a combat bounty there, which was a fairly easy one, and then a really big combat bounty here, which these fellows decided to alter their war plan to go attack that bounty because it offered a lot of money as a reward, and they had just beaten back the Alliance of the Sanctified attack force. Meanwhile, you can see that after the damage that was dealt to Solera Seaport and the navy of these guys, they decided to merge with Sea Cavalry to create, I think, the Cavalry Empire. So that was our very first nation merger, and it just helped 2 nations that weren't doing so well on their own to merge together and have a nation now with multiple people, multiple fleets, better economy. And you'll see several more as time goes on. Meanwhile, Imperial Tayo Navy has claimed the entire southern part of this continent, because at this point, occupying land gives you a huge return on your investment, so people are going to try and do that as much as they can. Um, yeah. Um, they tried out a new font. It didn't really look good because the capital was so massive compared to the lowercase for some reason. Anything else? I don't think so. Here we see the Sons of Swail's mobile headquarters finally reveal itself. And they go on the attack towards the Rubier di Sierra, one of the two main cities of Rescomanda Corporation. Now, it happened this way because of very bad diplomacy on the part of... Actually, hang on a minute. Wait a minute. Sorry. The HQ emerged the turn before on turn 13, traveled over here, threatened these guys, the Swales Federation of Merchants and Sellers, and said, hey, you'd better side with us to liberate Swales, or we're going to, like, kill you. And they were like, yep, we will do that. And then, but you should go invade these guys, because they're terrible. And due to their effective diplomacy, and some absolutely terrible diplomacy from Ruscommando, the Sons of Swales were convinced to do exactly that, and then moved over on the next turn to attack this major city, almost completely destroying it. Meanwhile, yeah, there's even more fleet showing up over here, because I believe these guys want to get involved in that to try and bring more peace or something. I'm not sure of everything going on. I think they also... Yeah, they start a conflict as well with the people in the corner. Vograin. Which actually doesn't really amount to much, but there was an attempt at starting a war, so I gotta give them that much. Anything fun happening over here? Yeah, I think at this point, the biggest cities in the world are Phoenix, and then either Modus Aureum, maybe one of these two, and Taio no Minato. Or MacArthur. MacArthur's also pretty big. Those are the capitals of nations which don't have a lot of small cities and which were doing very well economically. Other ones like these two just didn't have either as good of an economy or had too many spread out cities to get a single massive one. But Phoenix was the epitome of a massive city. If it got converted to be used as defenses, it would have been like 1 million they could have used for free to build vehicles to defend it. Meanwhile, we can see, here the Triumvirate are trying to take back their airbase, which they do with these guys withdrawing to Foothold. What else? Oh yeah, almost all the distress calls get answered. A lot of them by Caladria, sends out those. Some of them by these fellas, Rattlesnake. This one by a joint squadron of the Triumvirate and Dow. So at this point, I think the war over Foothold has been resolved with kind of like split custody. Because these fellas are getting scared of the alliance over here. So let me see what turn it was that the Alliance of Allied Nations formed. Right. So the Axis of Allied Nations formed on turn 13, which is composed of basically everyone on this side of the map. So it's all of these guys. I think it may have had... Central Powers Inc. was involved too. So basically half of the map at this point is... gearing up for conflict. Now, they had a plan. I think it was Operation 14 or something like that, where on turn 14 they were going to invade Wales and conquer everything. That got pushed back and then ultimately did not happen because Ruscommando voluntarily made themselves a puppet of Taio with minor benefits to them. What else is happening? Oh, yeah. So, finally, let's see this the turn before. Okay. So you see nothing happening, and then on turn 13, Durford Treaty Organization finally declares war on Dow. which involves coin, sending in a lot of fleets, and preparing a lot of nuclear weapons. These ones being cobalt, salted nuclear weapons. Now, there were several issues with this war plan, among them being that not everyone knew what was going on, including the Cordic Autonomous Empire, who thought they were playing both sides more so. So it was a poorly executed war declaration. And when you see a lot of bigger, even more stuff happening here, they did manage to fairly quickly capture a couple major, or a couple minor cities and take out some minor fleets, but it was very not the. It was actually an acceptable ratio of trading damage for the GTO, but they really didn't have the stomach for the war and were terrified, so this will end fairly quickly. Also to note, let me find it. Here we go. So the Triumvirate, Subjugators of the Triumvirate, I think it's produced here. I think they bought space from Cordic, or maybe they moved it down there, I'm not certain. No, they bought it so they paid the Cordic Autonomous Empire to let them build a fleet here, the Subjugators, which they then flew over, combined with this other fleet here, the Emissaries of Peace. And what they did was they captured Sacrum Luma, but what was interesting, which I don't think Dow even know to this day, is that they didn't burn the city to the ground. They left it mostly intact and scrapped it, and then had... So at this point, Steamworks is working for Dow to be their homeland defense. But of course, because it's being run by Kumomo, and Kumomo's playing every single different side of every angle, Kumomo is trying to get Dow backstabbed, even as they are the ones defending Dow from getting backstabbed. So they go over to Sacrum Luma the next turn to chase away the Triumvirate. As you see, they flee. And they say, oh no, when we got there, the city was gone. I guess they sacked it. In reality, I think they scrapped it and split the proceeds with Triumvirate or something like that. But that's a funny thing that I wanted to get out there now that now that we're at the end of the game. Yeah, what else? Where were we? Turn 13. So yeah, they fled there. And this, I think, is when the end of the war starts to come about. Yeah, with these guys finally withdrawing, with them accepting split custody over the center island, and so on. Here we see the war about to get started again. I think there was a little bounty thing set up over there. There's a bunch of random stuff going on, there's secret messages getting sent, telling fleet to send stuff at different locations. I think I've missed one or two of those. All kinds of cool stuff. Huge kudos to the people who ran those. It was mostly one of the helpers putting those together. But there were a few people, some nations sent their own, but it was mainly Raycast ultimately putting all that stuff. Or a lot of it anyways. So Raycast was running his own NGO somewhere. I think it's off the map at this point. But yeah, he was doing that while also helping out with the staff team on a lot of stuff. So he was big help for running a lot of things. There were more possible planned NPCs that could have taken place, but there was ultimately just not enough time for everything that we wanted to get done. What else is going on? Yeah, I think this is where these guys said, nope, we don't actually want to fight each other. Because the Axis Allied Nation were getting prepared to actually fight everyone else. Anything else I can see? So yeah, oh, here we go. So, yeah, there are tons of random scandals I'm just thinking of. Stuff with nukes, stuff with resources. Oh yeah, people were thinking the whole game that it was the Light of the Sanctified supplying uranium for Historia to use, because Historia don't have a uranium mine. But in reality, the entire game, it was the Cordic Autonomous Empire. That uranium right there cost millions of people their lives in Wales. but like no one really thought to ask Cordic, and everyone just assumed it would be their allies providing it, even as people went to inspect the mine. I told them the mine is not being used. They still didn't really believe it, and that just kind of got forgotten behind other drama. But yeah. What else? Did that bounty? I think that bounty got. Nope, bounty's still there. This I think was the turn when those people engaged it combined with these guys, and they just got massacred. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it for this turn. See, a Sons of Swales attacked there. And then, oh, yeah, you see. This is kind of like the last turn before the proper end game begins. So you've still got some of the wars going on, occupation, stuff like that. But after this, there's a real shift as everyone gets into like the calm before the storm of expecting the Axis Allied nations to invade the East. But what happens here, which is largely my fault that kind of prevented that, is some fleets showed up here. These were event fleets. Also, bug. That's what happens when you don't enter coordinates. Your fleet ends up there. I tried to catch most of them, but didn't get all of them, obviously. So one of the event help came up with a drone-based event, which got accidentally placed all of them up here, and they were a stronger strength than they really should have been. But that ultimately, as we go on, very soon is going to scare Axis Allied nations into not fighting these guys, which was a blunder on the side of event help, trying to get stuff put together. Let's see. Somewhere. Okay. So here we see a retaliatory nuclear strike coming from Cavalry Empire towards various people. The damage actually wasn't too severe. They kind of rolled poorly on these. But there's also nukes coming out from Dow, and I think there were some down nukes earlier too. And also, there's going to be a retaliatory strike with all these guys in a minute, I think. Anything else happening? Yeah. Here we can see in this, now that we're on to like the end game, so we're in the last 5 turns, we can see that all of Morai has finally been claimed by the Tayo Navy, securing their position quite easily as the biggest economy in the world, combined with some good early ecoing. We can see actually that this war is happening between Vograin and FSMS. Yeah. And also, we get a merger between the Eternal Steamworks of Victoria and the Duchy of Metford, with them occupying this land and over there, where some weird politicking happens, where Duchy of Metford kind of allies, or the new Victorian dynasty, allies with Dow, even as Dow vanishes from the continent. So this was something that I mainly did to spare the mental health of people in Durford who were not liking the way that war was going. The Dow, Divining Arcana Ordinum, volunteered to just get moved off the continent entirely to make it easier for everyone. So, some weird anomalous research going on in Modus Aureum managed to teleport their entire capital area just totally away. So they're now in a position that works better for them for preparing to fight AAN, and gets them out of the way of Durford Treaty Organization, who can now fight the much weaker and less like meta-optimized New Duchy. What else is going on? Oh, hang on, I missed that one. Last turn, the Tayo Navy managed to send bombers to defeat, finally, the Lost Prototypes bounty. It took like 100 bombers, and they very, very narrowly did it. But well done to them. Surprisingly, it wasn't too terrible on the PC to have that many vehicles, but hey, it worked. So here you can see the occupations come to an end. This war is, or mostly anyways, I think that may be a artifact, But I think at this point on turn 15, these people are no longer at war, and finally they're going to be cooperating on excavations and foothold. Trying to track what else might be going on. Yeah. I think that's it for now. Okay. So here you can see a lot of borders finally getting reconciled. These guys are claiming a ton of land over here on Planar around the deposit and on Ilum. Finally pretty much conquering all of the land there. The new duchy, or the new dynasty, Victorian dynasty, takes over all of the Dow land except for the aluminum there. And meanwhile, the Alliance of the Sanctified and their new partners in Dow figure out how to split up this continent with a little bit of cooperation with cavalry. Here we can see that the war is going hot again in Sir Wales. Of course it would. With contributions from SR, one of the NGOs, who I should not have let in as stated, because really they were just a proxy working for Russ Commando because they were friends out of game, which was just bad for game design. Because they had a very powerful fleet that I thought they would just use to keep themselves alive, but instead they got embroiled in a war, and they had an outsized amount of power for what they should have had, because I gave them more power to catch up, because whatever. A blunder on my end, and some poor sportsmanship from them. Here we can see the CV fleets, the drone swarms emerging, and attacking Tayo, with another group up here. The Point and the Soul were a planned event that actually got cancelled, so that way we could focus on what we expected to be the Hyper War, where basically the entire east side of the map fought the entire west side of the map. There's a alliance sheet I'll show you in a minute, but that didn't end up actually happening to the extent that we really wanted it to, because of weird politicking happening and events messing stuff up. So with the experience of Season 1, that should be better in Season 2. So yeah, here we've got now the conflict starting between these fellas. Last turn, Coin on turn 15 launched a nuclear strike with cobalt weapons that would have basically destroyed the entirety of, or a lot of resources and quite a few people in the Cavalry Empire, but ultimately due to the treaty and the disappearance of Dow, they decided to disarm all those warheads en route. And thankfully none of them went off, or that would have been a very bad time to be on this part of the map on the right. So thankfully that didn't emerge that way. Other stuff happening. Oh yeah, shoot, I totally missed the interloper. So, way back at the start of the game, there's Avum Empire, which I plan to use as my personal faction, because I had some designs I wanted to use, and it would give me a way to gauge like how it's working for everyone. But I quickly realized that it was way too much effort for me to maintain as well, and I couldn't find anyone to help me run it. So I put it on hold and then removed it from the map. Well, the Avum Empire is a canon faction of the world that we're on. And instead of being on this side of the disc, I put them on the other one. So on turn number 13, the interloper emerges from the hole being researched by Tayo. And they manage to communicate with it a little bit, but it ultimately flies off over the sea, where it visits Iceland, part of Silver Drive, and puts in some very weird requests and talks with them. And then it moves on to the south, and gets over to talk with Caladria, and then it kind of ends there. I meant to have it go further and do more plot, but at this point in the summer, I was very tired and exhausted, and people weren't really engaging with it as much as I wanted them to, so it kind of got left in the wayside. But that was the thing that happened. The Interloper is a flying upside-down airship of the Kindred Spirit class, if you look that up on the workshop for mine. But they were emissaries of the Avum Empire looking to see what's happening on this side of the world. So there's that. Back to turn 16. Here, there's not really any big conflict going on. It's just preparing for the Hyper War, which we think is coming. Moving on here, we see that Silver Drive and Zephyr combine to make the Silver Zephyr Coalition. This is, the second merger of nations. Or I guess third if you count the nation NGO merging over here. And then, because Vard is just not responding, his nation gets occupied, at least in part, and it'll soon get transferred over. Even more conflict happening on Wales, with the bombardment division from Tayo planned to be used, but it won't be, I don't think. And SFMS is also getting involved, sending fleets or tank forces inside. Anything else that I'm missing on this one? Here we go. So, the forces of the big alliance over here, which called themselves the Entente, because they're fighting the Axis Valley Nation, they called themselves the Entente, start sending forces over here to fight. And those will show up, I think, next turn. So let's get to 18. So on turn 18, the fight between the Entente and the Axis does begin in earnest. But really, it's just all of the Entente dogpiling Silver Zephyr Coalition. Because Tayo hadn't moved their fleets, and they're very slow fleets, so they weren't able to get over here very quickly. And besides that, they're caught up fighting the drone swarms. Which, again, was neither. We shouldn't have had the drone swarm event happen at this point in time, and nor should it have been so focused on the left side of the map. It should have hit both sides more equally. That was just a blunder on kind of both sides, because they could have been moving over earlier anyways, but poor coordination just between everyone, really. Basically in their very first strike, these guys managed to capture a lot of territory, which I think I'll have highlighted in occupation colors next turn. Meanwhile, the Aronians are fighting with their new neighbors, the Victorian Dynasty, and I think Coin is Coin I think is not involved in this one. And KAE is also doing nothing, just because of internal struggles with them. At this point, though, several big things happen. Let's swap back and forth. Big things. So, Vard, Hungry Deep, gets consumed, because he just wasn't active at all. Tayo changes colors. They split their administration in two, to have one of them running, or I think the little guys are like the Imperial Dynasty, who are running the puppet, who was supposed to be working with them, but really wasn't. And then the main country can now focus on fighting this war. And then the other thing is the Luno-Serpian Union becomes a thing, where a drifting moon finally combines with the Rattlesnake Pact, which was planned from, turn 0, pretty much. They had this idea to merge. But despite that, they were the last country to actually merge together, and several others beat them to it, even though they were the ones to think of it first. But at least before then, their group chat was a great place for them to talk about World of Warships together, so at least they got that out of the way. You also see the start of a civil war in Victoria, where they managed to, I think negotiate at this point an end to the war with the Aronian Federation and a civil war between, the two factions of the dynasty, being, the more airship-focused original Duchy of Metford and the Eternal Steamworks fighting each other over what the command structure will look like. And of course, the war is really heating up over here in Rescamando, and more battles happening over here, more occupation, more stuff getting claimed. Now, you notice a very big ship here called 6IF. Silver Zephyr Coalition managed to go into a great quantity of debt to purchase a very, very expensive super weapon ship. I probably maybe shouldn't have let that happen, but they were just getting beat up very badly, and it wouldn't have changed too much. Also, had I planned on this actually being the second to last turn, I wouldn't have let them go that far into debt either. But I was willing to accept it because I thought we'd have another 5 turns. As it turned out, we stopped after 20, as was the original plan. But yeah, there was a big battle here, which was actually like one of the only defeats for the Divini Arcana Ordinum. Although they were kind of going up against a massive fleet that they didn't necessarily know was going to be there. There's also, you see, Virum Vindictamiro. If you've been paying attention, you won't have seen this crossing the map, because they got the super weapon of a cloaked ship using some deposit tech, which snuck over to here and then managed to do a double strike against Tayo, who just couldn't see them coming. Anything else? I'm trying to think of. This is going to be like a decisive battle that kind of affects the state in West Commando, which I'll talk about on next turn, I think. Anything else? Oh, yeah. Historia tried but failed to knock out a big part of the Iranian Federation over here. Honestly, I don't even know why they were fighting. I think they were being paid by Victoria, the Victorian dynasty, who I think managed to puppet them when that weird... so much politics got happening at the end. But I think Victoria got the Duchy of Historia, or the Kingdom of Historia, I think at this point, as a subject, and used them to try and attack Iranian. Yeah, let's move on to the final map, turn number 20. So you can see that West Commando was defeated. They would have lost anyways to just the overwhelming firepower of their neighbors, but instead they also rage quit, as well as SR and Brotherhood of Laclania, another NGO that was kind of mostly based over here. So they got divided by their 3 neighbors. Meanwhile, yeah, a lot of Silver Zephyr has been occupied, including their capital. ITN are slowly moving a fleet over to try and fight them, but we've reached the end of the game. And Light of the Sanctified get backstabbed by their allies, Corex and the Remnant Federation. With MacArthur subsequently getting destroyed, partly due to the attack, and even more largely due to the use of underwater nuclear missile silos that fired basically upon its own city, and basically wiped out the entire thing. So very bad news for them. And then meanwhile, the Iranian Federation also got split between the Victorian Dynasty and KAE due to that player's exit from the game. Meanwhile, Monk Lizard's nation, absolutely vibing. No wars, no fights, all peace. And a fairly good economy at the end of things, honestly. Yeah, a little bit of a meme there that they just... Well, them and I guess Caladria didn't have much fighting. They had a little bit of intervention at the beginning. But Caladria, like, never changed territory, never fought any major wars. These guys did get more territory, but never fought in a major war. Or any war, for that matter. So yeah, that's where we ended it. Had the war gone on, it's possible that the West could have made a comeback, especially if Central Powers got involved against Pact of Cavaltor and the rest of the Entente. DTO was at this point incredibly fractured, and no one really wanted to fight anymore over there. And maybe there could have been a big war. So the planned things that would have happened in the next 5 turns would have been the Hyper War would have finally properly gotten happening. But it would have been very difficult for Tayo to fight against all the nations, basically on their own, with SSC almost knocked out. So Whalezilla, a nuclear-powered Godzilla-esque monster, arrived on the continent, nomping up all that uranium, due to the huge amount of nuclear weapons fired by Historia. and Brisby, the lovely Left O'Neill's Corp manager, who had something of a taste for nuclear proliferation, planned to attack the IIEERRAACC which I don't even remember the acronym for that at this point, or initialism. But they're an international nuclear non-proliferation group, basically, for the Crucible. Oh yeah, by the way, this is the Crucible, is the name for this map area. So yeah, that's where we ended it. These were the survivors of the game. I want to say like 6 nations were eliminated, either through conquest or mergers, maybe 5. And yeah, that's where we got to at this point. Looking at the final alliances, here we see the Axis of Allied Nations, the remains of Durford Treaty Organization, not that they're very well organized, and the Pact of Cavaltor and Alliance of the Sanctified. Although this is like a turn 19 alliance, or this is like a turn 15 alliance. Sorry, because DTO fell apart by the end. POK merged with the Alliance of the Sanctified, but betrayed LTS, and Central Powers was likely to renege on their arrangement, or no, to keep with AAN. They actually planned on backstabbing AAN, but decided not to backstab once they realized how badly it was going for AAN. And then, Phoenix was involved with POK. And then, here are some other maps in a different style that Kumomo made, which look really good. In a more like classical map style instead of the more digitized bright colors that I use for the main map. So, yeah. Thank you all for listening to my ramblings of... Let me check the recording. This is now a hour and 10-minute video. Goodness. So, thank you all for your patience and for watching this, and I'll see what other post-season videos I can get out there. Otherwise, I'm looking forward very much to Season 2, and I hope to see you all there. Thanks for everything. As they say in France, au revoir.